It's funny how huge history-altering events can take place in this country and around the world, and most people seem to have no idea they happened. It's not that Americans are stupid, it's that our media outlets, often under direct pressure from the U.S. government, suppress those stories, the stories that matter. The effect of this arrangement, and by the way, it's the intended effect, is to leave the population of the United States dangerously ignorant on questions that affect their lives. At this point, you have to wonder if the average, say, New Yorker is really better informed than a factory worker in Pyongyang, North Korea. Probably not. Both have been effectively blindfolded by information monopolies. And if you doubt that's true, ask your neighbors who's winning the war in Ukraine. And of course, they'll tell you that Ukraine is winning. Duh. That's what they've seen on the Today Show every morning for the past 11 months. And not just on the Today Show, but on virtually every media outlet in America, apart from Colonel Doug McGregor's appearances on this show, for which he has, needless to say, been condemned as an agent of Putin. But he's pretty much alone. Here's the version that most Americans see.
President Zelensky described the time as the beginning of the end of the war. Does he have that right?
Well, I think it's clear that Ukraine is winning.
The Ukrainians are on the offensive. They're winning this war right now. Why would you want to stop supporting the Ukrainians when they are winning on the battlefield?
Ukraine is winning, but they haven't won, and Russia is losing, but they have not lost.
Right now, I think it's fair to say Ukraine has the upper hand. Ukraine is winning its war thanks to the enormous support we and others have provided, and we need to keep the pressure on Putin.
Well, that was just last month. I think it's clear that Ukraine is winning, says defense contractor Barry McCaffrey, with what sounds like hard-earned authority. Ukraine is winning, says Michael McFaul of Stanford University. Ukraine is winning, says Hillary Clinton. Ukraine is winning, proclaim the entire American media establishment, and anyone who suggests otherwise must be working for Russia. That's what they've been telling you relentlessly because they want you to think we're on the winning team. And most Americans believe them because how could they know otherwise? They don't have sources in Ukraine. So you can imagine the shock that Washington Post readers must have experienced this weekend when they read the op-ed by Robert Gates and Condoleezza Rice. Now, if you're trying to locate the two most thoroughly discredited figures in the American foreign policy establishment, you'd probably pick Bob Gates and Condi Rice, because few have done more to weaken this country. But again, most Americans don't know that because the media would never say that, ever, because Gates and Rice are paid-up members of the club. And Gates and Rice want you to know in their op-ed in the Post that Ukraine is losing badly. In fact, they write, unless the U.S. continues to prop up Ukraine's military and economy forever and fight Russia directly, that country will collapse and Putin could invade Malibu. Here we're quoting directly. Ukraine's economy is in a shambles. Millions of its people have fled, its infrastructure is being destroyed, and much of its mineral wealth, industrial capacity, and considerable agricultural land are under Russian control. Ukraine's military capability and economy are now entirely dependent on lifelines from the West, primarily the United States. End quote. Wait, what? Isn't that the opposite, the direct opposite of what you just saw, of what they've been telling all of us until, say, last week? Indeed, it is the opposite. Shouldn't we have known these facts, before Mitch McConnell signed off on yet another multi-billion-dollar aid package to Zelensky and his wife? Yep, we should have known, but there was no way to know because the media wouldn't tell us. And they wouldn't tell us because they're controlled. And Ukraine is not the only war they have been lying about. How about Mexico? There's a full-blown civil war underway tonight 100 yards from San Diego. The Mexican government has lost control of parts of its own country to the armies of the drug cartels, which are now powerful enough to threaten commercial air travel in Mexico. At least 150,000 people have died in this war so far. How many is that? Well, that's more than twice the number of deaths that the U.S. suffered during the entire Vietnam War. Did you know that? You probably didn't, because our media never mention it. But here's video from Mexico shot in just the past few days. So that's Mexico. Keep in mind, we share a nearly 2,000-mile-long border with the country you just saw. So you don't have to be Robert Gates or Barry McCaffrey or some other august foreign policy mandarin to wonder, if that's happening there right now, why won't it spill over into the United States? And of course, needless to say, it will spill over into the United States. And why wouldn't it? There's no border left. Shouldn't Americans know that? Yes, they should. But most have no idea because the media won't tell them. Joe Biden, the President of the United States, went to the border yesterday, and there was no mention of the Civil War right across the river. That's not just weird, it's scary. And it's just the beginning of the deception from your media. Ending the use of fossil fuels is the #1 domestic priority of the Democratic Party and of the White House that leads that party. So how is this new green utopia going to work exactly? Well, we don't have to guess at that. It's already happening in Europe, and the result has been, let's see, mass poverty and social unrest. Within the last week, there have been enormous protests in Paris, the capital of Europe, against a government that cares more about global warming theology than about the lives of its children. Did you know that? Did you have any idea? You probably didn't. Here's what it looks like. So that seems like a big story, right? And yet, in our media landscape, that story effectively doesn't exist. So if you want details about what is currently happening in Paris, you're going to have to track down an English-language Turkish news site called Anadolu. And in that site, you will read a story in which a Turkish reporter interviews one of the protesters, who puts it this way, and we're quoting, "We went out today for the sake of all the French who are dying of hunger because of the high prices they can no longer afford." Well, that's kind of a big story. People going hungry in Paris? Well, yeah. Energy prices in France are at an all-time high thanks to climate policy, and that means people can't buy food. Shouldn't you know that? Might that be relevant to you? But you don't know it because the Biden administration and the media don't want you to know. The Biden administration is busy spending your tax dollars trying to replicate the disaster you just saw in France here and around the world. And most people have no idea it's even happening. And that's by design because our media are controlled. And if you still don't believe that, if you don't believe that what you see and read from our news outlets is fake, consider what is happening tonight in Brazil. So thanks to what was very clearly a rigged election, a convicted criminal called Lula da Silva is now the president of the most important country in South America. Millions of people in Brazil understand exactly what happened. They know that their democracy has been hijacked, possibly forever. But there's not much they can do about that. Lula may be a criminal, in fact he is, but he has the full support of both the Biden administration and the Chinese government. So yesterday, in frustration, a group of Brazilian protesters swarmed their legislature. Watch.
Seu Klaus, estão tirando com bala de verdade, hein, cara?
Vai abrir espaço aqui, ó. Vai abrir
Nós
espaço.
estamos tudo dentro da linha.
Vai lá do outro lado, não tá vendo?
Now, you may actually have seen some of that video in the United States over the last couple of days, and you saw it because it has political uses. What's happened in Brazil is being likened to January 6th, and of course populist leaders in this country are being blamed for it. Oh, it was Trump and Steve Bannon who did it. That's not true, but even if it were true, it would be just the tail end of the story. It would be the result of something that happened before. So the obvious question is, why are protesters in Brazil so angry? Well, they're angry because the new Lula government has eliminated their most basic civil liberties. Lula is working to turn Brazil into a Chinese-style dictatorship, and he's doing it very quickly with maximum aggression. Now, our media don't want to talk about that. They refuse to. Why? Well, for reasons that should make you very nervous. Matt Turmine has been covering this story anyway, virtually alone among American reporters. He's done some extraordinary reporting, and he has some extraordinary details for us tonight. He joins us now. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. So, simple question. Why are the protesters in Brazil so angry?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. They have this hard-fought constitutional republic and strong, robust democracy, or do they? Lula was, as you correctly stated, a convicted felon, 19 judges, 12 charges, 12-year sentence, and released by a Supreme Court Justice, Alexander de Moraes, and his team of fellow traveling Supreme Court justices to enter into this election. And then this election had no transparency. So the protesters who protested for the last 70 days peacefully, no arson, no violence, just wanted a evidence proof that this was an honest election. They did not get it. They have stayed by the military, begging the military to adjudicate the separated powers dispute. Now, it turns out, as the plot usually does thicken in these situations, that there were many an agent provocateur yesterday at these buildings and doing incredible gross damage, breaking windows and such. And it looks like this is turning into a Reichstag fire and being used to clamp down on these democratic protests. The protests are no more. The camps have been disbanded by executive and judicial mandate and fiat. And now they've set up a concentration camp where 1,200 Brazilian citizens are locked in the gymnasium and grounds of the Federal Police Training Center in Brasilia. And it has just been reported that 2 of them have died. There is no water, no food, no bathrooms. Brazilian countrymen of this government are being treated in worse circumstances than the Geneva Convention allows for foreign combatants. It is absolutely gross, and even more gross, as we just found out, according to a high-ranking influential senator, Marcos Doval, released documents that prove the Justice Minister, Flavio Dino, knew about it the day before, that there would be violence potentially, and even the setup for violence, and Lula knew as well. They did not cordon off the buildings. It looks like there are even more similarities with our own.
I'm recognizing the template here, but just to zero it out, so the country's becoming a dictatorship, and the State Department and all the celebrities, Mark Ruffalo and the rest, who supported this criminal Lula, are saying nothing, and they're continuing to support it as he eliminates civil liberties?
That is absolutely correct. There is nothing but frame it as Bannon, Trump, Bolsonaro plotted a coup from Florida, which there is no facts that back that up even remotely.
Yeah. Matthew Turmine, I appreciate your report tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So as we said, the sporadic fighting in Mexico, which has been ongoing since at least 2006, really at this point can only be described as a civil war. And it's intensifying. It has massive implications for the United States. Fox's Bill Melugin has been on top of it for quite some time now. He joins us tonight. Bill, what's happening, would you say, in Mexico at the moment?
Tucker, good evening to you. It's calmed down a little bit now, but what happened south of our border just a few days ago really looked more reminiscent of scenes from the Iraq War, because we're talking the Mexican military and the Sinaloa cartel engaged in all-out combat, all-out war. Take a look at this video showing a Mexican military helicopter firing down on Sinaloa cartel positions in the Mexican city of Culiacan. You can hear that machine gun firing. You can see those tracers in the night as the Mexican government was running an operation that ended with the successful capture of Ovidio Guzman. That's the son of notorious Sinaloa cartel kingpin El Chapo. Now, the Mexican government says they had to call in these Black Hawk helicopters to attack a convoy of 25 cartel vehicles, including truck-mounted cartel gun platforms. Now, as you can imagine, that operation stirred up an absolute hornet's nest with the cartel. This video here shows Sinaloa cartel gunmen and sicarios setting up a roadblock on a local road in response. They're armed with machine guns and heavy weaponry, and they are preparing to fight. It's also a reminder of the heavy weaponry the cartels have access to, equal to the Mexican military. Another video shows the Mexican military being ambushed by cartel gunmen in Tamaulipas, as some innocent civilians are caught in the crossfire. Now, during all that widespread violence, the Mexican government reports 30 people were left dead, including 10 Mexican soldiers and 19 suspected Sinaloa cartel members. And the violence certainly wasn't just isolated to city streets. Take a look at this video. You can't hear what's going on, but what it shows is passengers on a civilian aircraft taking cover as their aircraft is shot by cartel members as their plane is sitting on the runway. That flight was preparing to leave Culiacan for Mexico City. Thankfully, none of the civilians on that airplane ended up getting hurt.